A millionaire, leaving late for a meeting, saw a beggar with a baby. Without thinking, he gave him the keys to his house. When he returned, he entered in without knocking and was shocked by what he saw. Before starting the video, tell me where you are watching this video and what time it is. The city was a kaleidoscope of chaos and beauty that rainy afternoon. Sheets of rain battered the towering skyscrapers, their glass facades reflecting streaks of gray. The roads glistened like liquid mirrors, crowded with cars honking in frustration. People hurried along the sidewalks, umbrellas colliding like awkward dancers. Amidst this symphony of haste, Michael Ardent, a billionaire whose name often graced the headlines, was running late. His custom-made suit clung to him uncomfortably as he bolted toward his gleaming black Maserati, the meeting of a lifetime waiting on the other side of town. Every step was measured, every second accounted for. But as he reached his car, his focus shattered like glass on stone. There, just feet away, sat a man hunched on the curb. Beggar. His tattered clothes were soaked through, plastered to his thin frame. In his arms, a baby no older than a year whimpered softly, her tiny face scrunched in discomfort. The beggar leaned over her protectively, shielding her with his threadbare coat, shivering as if his bones themselves were frozen. Michael hesitated. His hand hovered over the car door, eyes darting to his watch. 4 minutes late already. He had worked for years to secure this meeting, a deal that could redefine his business empire. But the image of the baby's trembling lips tugged at something deep within him, a part he rarely let surface in his world of precision and control. Before he could overthink, Michael strode toward the beggar. "Here," he said, thrusting the keys into the man's startled hands. "This is the address." He scribbled it on a rain-soaked business card, the ink smudging but legible. "Go there now. There's food, warmth, everything you need. Stay as long as you like." The beggar's mouth opened, but no words came out. Only disbelief. Michael didn't wait for a response. With a curt nod, he turned, rain soaking his hair, and slipped into the Maserati. As the car sped off, his mind churned with doubts. Did I just give a stranger the keys to my house? Hours later, the meeting was a blur. Success, handshakes, applause. Yet Michael couldn't shake the image of that baby or the nagging question of what awaited him at home. When he arrived, the rain had stopped. The world smelled of damp earth and renewal. His house loomed in the darkness, its lights glowing warmly. He didn't knock, didn't call ahead. Instead, he pushed the door open. Inside, what he saw stopped him cold. Michael Ardent wasn't always a millionaire. Born to schoolteachers in a small town, his childhood had been comfortable but unremarkable. What defined his upbringing wasn't wealth, but the lessons his parents wove into the fabric of his life. Kindness costs nothing, his mother would say, her warm hands guiding his as they baked bread to share with neighbors. His father, always with a book in hand, reminded him that knowledge and empathy were the tools to shape a better world. Those words had stayed with Michael, even as he built his empire brick by brick. Yet success had come with a price. A man once surrounded by warmth now lived in a fortress of glass and steel, with assistants buzzing around to cater to his every need. Behind closed doors, though, the solitude was deafening. His wife, Claire, had been his anchor in those early days. But a tragic accident 5 years ago had taken her away. She had been the heart of his home, the reason it felt alive. Since then, his sprawling mansion had become little more than a cold monument to memories he avoided. That morning, as Michael prepared for the meeting, he had gazed at a photograph of Claire on his desk. Her laugh seemed to echo in the room, but only for a moment before reality pulled him back. This meeting is everything, he reminded himself. It was the culmination of months of strategy and negotiation, a chance to solidify his company's global footprint. The rainstorm outside seemed to mock his urgency, each drop a barrier to his goal. When the beggar and baby appeared in his path, they disrupted the meticulous flow of his day. Yet, as he stared at them, soaked to the bone, his heart constricted. Memories of Claire swirled, How she had once insisted on bringing home a stray dog during a thunderstorm, laughing as she dried its fur by the fire. Something in the beggar's eyes reminded him of himself years ago. A man on the edge of hopelessness, searching for a thread of compassion. And the baby, a fragile life untouched by the cruelties of the world, was an image he couldn't ignore. If Claire had been there, he knew exactly what she would have done. So he made his choice. The house he had built but barely lived in would now shelter these strangers. He rationalized it quickly. What's the worst that could happen? He had security cameras, insurance, and backup systems for everything. But even as he handed over the keys, a voice inside whispered that this wasn't about logistics. It was about the human instinct to help. It was about honoring a part of him he feared had been lost. The rain fell harder as he sped off to his meeting, but a flicker of warmth had already lit within him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The beggar's thin fingers trembled as he adjusted the coat draped over the baby. The rain seeped through its ragged fabric, dripping onto her flushed cheeks. She let out a weak cry, her tiny fists flailing feebly. He murmured to her, his voice cracking, "Shoo, it's okay, little one. Just a little longer." Michael stood frozen, the sight of them hitting him like a punch to the gut. The beggar's eyes were hollow, rimmed with exhaustion, but they blazed with fierce determination. A man who had nothing left except the will to protect the fragile life in his arms. Michael felt his pulse quicken. "You don't have time for this," his mind insisted. He glanced at his car, the dashboard clock ticking in his imagination. But his feet wouldn't move. He couldn't turn away from them, not after seeing the way the man clutched the baby as though she were his only tether to the world. The beggar noticed him then. His expression wary but pleading. "Please," his voice was hoarse, almost inaudible over the rain. "She's sick. I don't know what to do." Michael's chest tightened. The baby's faint cries pierced through the storm, reaching a place deep within him that had been dormant for years. For a moment, the city around him disappeared. There was no rain, no meeting, no Maserati, only the desperate tableau in front of him. He thought of Claire again, her voice clear in his memory. "If you can help someone, Michael, you must. You never know when it might save them, or you." She'd said it the night they decided to fund a shelter for runaway teens, her eyes alight with passion. He inhaled sharply. "Wait here," he said, his tone brisk but his hands already reaching into his pocket. The beggar's brow furrowed in confusion as Michael pulled out his keys and pressed them into the man's palm. "My house," Michael said, pulling a business card from his wallet and scribbling on the back. The ink bled slightly in the rain, but the address was still legible. "Take her there. There's food, warmth, medicine, everything you'll need." The beggar blinked, clutching the keys as if they were a mirage. I can't take." "Yes, you can," Michael interrupted firmly. "Oh, now. Before she gets worse." The beggar opened his mouth to protest again, but the weight of the keys and the certainty in Michael's voice silenced him. He nodded, tears mingling with the rain on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. Michael turned on his heel, walking quickly to his car before he could second-guess himself. As he drove off, his mind raced. Had he just made a mistake? But beneath the worry, there was a flicker of something else. Relief, perhaps even hope. The beggar stood in the rain long after Michael had driven away, the keys heavy in his hand. He glanced down at the business card, the address smudged but readable. His grip tightened as he looked at the baby, her cries growing softer, weaker. He couldn't afford to hesitate. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, his voice cracking as he adjusted her in his arms. The baby let out a small, plaintive whimper, her tiny hand grasping his collar. He swallowed hard, determination overcoming his doubts. For her he would go. The walk to the address felt endless, each step through the rain pulling him deeper into disbelief. A house. His house. This can't be real. He fought against years of mistrust, years that had taught him that people didn't give without taking. But the man with the sharp suit and soft eyes had seemed different. When he reached the gate, The beggar stopped, breathless. The mansion loomed before him, its towering silhouette glowing with warm lights. He stared, afraid to step forward, afraid it would all vanish if he did. But the baby stirred in his arms, a faint cry breaking his paralysis. Inside, the warmth hit him like a wave. He staggered through the entryway, his boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. The house was vast, pristine, and utterly foreign to him. Plush rugs and gleaming wood stretched into rooms he couldn't even begin to count. A fire crackled in a marble hearth, its glow illuminating shelves of books and walls adorned with elegant artwork. He sank onto the nearest couch, the baby cradled against his chest. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair, relief. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered to the baby, "We're safe. At least for tonight we're safe." Miles away, Michael stood in the center of a sleek conference room, surrounded by the titans of his industry. The deal had gone flawlessly. His pitch delivered with the kind of charm and precision that had made him a legend in the corporate world. Handshakes, applause, champagne. It was everything he'd envisioned. Yet his mind wasn't there. He found himself glancing at the clock, his thoughts straying back to the beggar and the baby. Did they find the house? Did they believe me? Then darker thoughts crept in. What if they steal everything? What if I come home to an empty house? His assistant nudged him gently. "Sir, they're waiting for your toast." Michael raised his glass, smiling politely, but his words felt hollow. He finished quickly, making excuses to leave the celebration early. The rain had stopped, and as his driver took him home, his unease grew. The mansion's lights were visible in the distance when his heart began to pound. He entered without knocking, his footsteps echoing in the vast foyer. "Hello," he called out, his voice cutting through the silence. The sight waiting for him in the living room stole his breath. Michael stepped cautiously into the living room, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. His eyes scanned the space, expecting chaos, perhaps overturned furniture, missing valuables, or at the very least, an empty room. Instead, the sight before him froze him in place. The beggar sat cross-legged on the floor, the baby wrapped snugly in one of Michael's cashmere throws. A plate of food rested beside him, Michael's finest china, he noticed, and the man was carefully spooning mashed vegetables into the baby's tiny mouth. She cooed softly, her cheeks now pink with warmth and nourishment. The man's face was calm but deeply focused, his every movement deliberate, as though the act of feeding her was sacred. But that wasn't what struck Michael most. The beggar's other hand rested on something Michael hadn't seen in years, a photo album. It lay open to a page he knew well, a picture of Claire, beaming as she held up a freshly baked pie. The beggar's gaze lingered on the photograph, his lips trembling as he whispered, "She hasn't changed." Michael's voice came out hoarse. "What did you say?" The beggar jerked his head up, startled, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't mean to." His words faltered as he tried to stand, cradling the baby protectively. Michael held up a hand. "Wait." He stepped closer, his pulse racing. "What do you mean she hasn't changed? Did you know my wife?" The man's shoulders sagged, his breath hitching as he spoke. "Claire. She was the only person who ever helped me before. Years ago." His voice cracked under the weight of the memory. "I was working odd jobs, barely surviving. One winter I collapsed outside a bakery, her bakery. She didn't just call an ambulance, she took me in, fed me, gave me clothes." Michael's heart thundered in his chest. Claire had always been a quiet force of compassion, helping people without ever mentioning it. But this felt like a thread connecting the past and present in a way he couldn't have imagined. The beggar continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to take advantage, so I left after a few days. But before I did, she gave me this." He reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was enough money to start over. "I kept the envelope as a reminder." Michael stared at the envelope, his throat tightening as he recognized Claire's handwriting on the outside. To anyone who needs it. The room seemed to shrink around him. The decision to give the keys to his house now felt less like a random act of kindness and more like something larger, something guided by the echoes of Claire's spirit. "I didn't know," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. "She never told me." The beggar nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. "She told me kindness was never about recognition. It was about doing what's right." In that moment, Michael saw not a beggar, but a man trying to honor the same values Claire had lived by. The connection was undeniable, and it left Michael shaken to his core. Michael sat down heavily on the couch, his eyes fixed on the envelope in the beggar's hand. The familiar curve of Claire's handwriting struck him like a physical blow, stirring memories of her generosity, her unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and let out a long breath. "She saved you," he said quietly, more to himself than the beggar. The man nodded, his grip tightening on the envelope as though it were a lifeline. "And now you've saved me and her." He glanced down at the baby, who had fallen asleep in the warmth of the cashmere throw. "I didn't know how much longer I could keep her safe. I didn't know if I could." His voice cracked, and he looked away. Michael studied him, taking in the lines etched into his face, not just from age but from years of hardship. He thought of the mansion, its empty halls, its pristine perfection devoid of any real purpose. The house Claire had once dreamed of filling with love and laughter had become a monument to his loneliness. But now it felt alive again, as if her spirit had returned through this act of chance or fate. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," Michael said, his voice steadier now. "The baby, she deserves a chance. And so do you." The beggar's eyes widened. "I can't take charity." "This isn't charity," Michael interrupted. "It's a partnership. You take care of her, and I'll help you get back on your feet. You'll have a place here for as long as you need it." The man hesitated, his pride and gratitude warring on his face. But the baby stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and his expression crumbled. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." Michael smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "You don't have to. Just pay it forward someday." The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. Michael arranged for the baby to see a doctor and filled the house with clothes, toys, and everything a child could need. He hired a counselor to help the beggar navigate his next steps, including reconnecting with family he hadn't seen in years. The beggar, who introduced himself as Tom, began to transform. His posture straightened, his face softened, and his voice grew steadier as he told stories of his past. The baby, now named Grace at Michael's suggestion, became the heartbeat of the house, her laughter echoing in every room. The mansion no longer felt like a shrine to loss. It felt like a home, a second chance for everyone under its roof. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the lives within Michael's once empty mansion. Grace took her first steps in the grand living room, toddling across the rug with Tom hovering nearby, his hands ready to catch her. Her giggles filled the space, weaving life into the walls in a way that Michael hadn't realized he had been craving. Tom had flourished under Michael's guidance. The once weary man now worked as an assistant at a local nonprofit, helping others who were struggling as he once had. The pride in his voice when he told Michael about his first paycheck was palpable. "I want to start saving for Grace," he said one evening, his eyes bright with determination. "I want her to have every opportunity." Michael had nodded, his chest tight with emotion. He saw a reflection of Claire's unwavering hope in Tom, a testament to how far kindness could carry someone. For the first time since Claire's death, Michael felt as though he were truly honoring her memory, not with monuments or charities, but by continuing her legacy in the way she would have wanted. On a crisp autumn morning, Tom surprised Michael with a small, unassuming gift. It was a wooden frame, handcrafted and slightly uneven, but polished with care. Inside was a photograph, Grace, her cheeks rosy, sitting on Michael's lap while Tom stood behind them, a wide grin on his face. They looked like a family, even if the ties weren't by blood. I thought, Tom began hesitantly, shifting his weight. I thought you might like this. For your desk. Michael took the frame, his fingers brushing over the smooth wood. His throat tightened as he stared at the image. It was simple, yet it captured everything he hadn't realized he had been searching for. A sense of belonging, of connection. Thank you, Michael said, his voice thick. It's perfect. That evening, after Grace had been tucked into bed and Tom had retired to his room, Michael sat alone in the study. The photograph rested on his desk, illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp. Next to it was the crumpled envelope Tom had kept for years, Claire's handwriting still clear despite its wear. Michael reached for it, opening it carefully. Inside, he found not only the faded bills Tom had mentioned but a small note Claire had written. Kindness isn't an obligation. It's an opportunity to heal, both ourselves and others. He leaned back in his chair, tears pricking at his eyes. For the first time in years, the ache of Claire's absence felt lighter. She was still with him in the choices he made, in the lives he touched. As he sat there, the house around him quiet but alive with new beginnings, Michael allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in years. Peace.